All right, let's call this meeting of the Ethics and Election Committee to order. Today is Wednesday, February 15th, 2023. We're here at the Election Center. We'll start out with some introductions. I'm the chair, Pete Peterson.
Christopher Hogshead.
Suzanne France. Dee Ennis. Robin Dern.
Kevin Cross.
Jamie Hines, Election Administrator.
Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk.
Okay, fantastic. Well, the first item we have on our agenda is people on the phone. Also introduce yourselves.
You have Randy Solt.
Mr. Solt, okay.
Felix North Soleil.
All right. Anyone else? I think possibly Ms. Quinn Davidson might be joining us at some point. Anyway, so the first item on the agenda is the Anchorage Equity Committee introductions. Are there members here today that are on the Equity Committee?
Hello, my name is Felix North Soleil. I am a member of the Anchorage Equity Committee, and I'm here listening. Just want to learn, right, and see what you all are doing, and yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The next item we have on our agenda is the conflict of interest disclosures, and we're in the process of updating and sort of rewriting these, and we have our contractor Dee Ennis here that's going to go over this with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And first of all, I wanted to thank many of you. We've been through a few versions of this approach, and we finally settled on another approach. It was difficult to get before the ethics board, but I am meeting with them next Thursday. And for anybody who doesn't know, I was their attorney for about 14 years. I have a pretty good idea what they will like and not like. And so I'm hoping that we get through it next week. I have another handout for them that goes over some legal issues. But what I handed out today is a proposed rewrite. I listened to all of you and many good suggestions, like Barbara noted, we don't even have a definition of interest. I went, we don't have a definition of conflict of interest. I went, Suzanne asked us to try to speak in English. She may not really put in a number of legal terms that would have made it so much easier for me. Including the other night, I wanted to add undue influence, and I said, I can't use that word, I can't do it. So I took it out. But I also just rewrote the entire section instead of just the portion on adequate disclosure, because it was my opinion from the beginning, the problem is not the questions, the problems lies in the disclosure itself. They're incredibly weak disclosures. The questions that people are asking, those are meant to be factors that for the assembly to consider. So someone did a very thorough disclosure, and then the assembly, and from that, the assembly could make a determination. They didn't have to ask those lists of questions. Again, they weren't meant to be questions. They're simply factors. We've taken them out. So we tried to simplify this approach. Along with this, I've about 2/3 done the training packet, which has a quick summary on the first page of some of the principles, the underlying principles you need to look at. But then has examples. So 6 or 8 examples, which we discussed, I think, in the first session here, or maybe a work session. Here's examples. So this is how that would play out in an adequate disclosure. Disclosures, for people that haven't been through this before, are very important. If you don't have adequate disclosures, not only can you be subject to problems with ethics board, but the legislation can be subject to attack. So you must have adequate disclosures. And so again, I thank this group especially Suzanne, Pete, Barbara, that we really have spent a lot of time convincing me of alternative approaches. Now, my plan is, after going through this day, and I want you to tell me, go, D, that still doesn't make sense, and D, how about this? This word doesn't make sense. I want sort of in the weeds comments from you. But next Thursday, I'm going to the ethics board to get some additional materials for them. And then my plan is, assuming all this goes well, is to get this on the regular agenda on March 9th and at the meeting on the 21st. Whether you need a work session on the 17th, consider that. It's just this section. So those are my deadlines. So it will get through this year, for this group, because you put so much time and energy into it already. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through this if I can. So here, our new definition, we have one for interest now. By the way, interest definitions in the ethics world are all over the board. And you can imagine what attorneys do with the word interest. Page long, what an interest is. I picked this one. An interest is a commitment, obligation, duty, or goal associated with a particular role of the public servant. And by the way, we have to use the word public servant because this code section applies not only to elected officials, but also to board and commission members and employees, actually. And I like that, the role, because it's your role as a teacher, your role as a board member of some other group. So I think that's an easy to understand concept, what your role is. And by the way, stop me anytime if you have a suggestion or question. Okay? Private interest. Private interest, and this was from the current code, but it was found back in the definitional section. It wasn't in the conflict of interest, so we just used the term without defining it easily. A private interest is an interest affecting, belonging, or occurring to an individual or private entity as distinct from the public at large. The interest may be held by a public servant, the public servant's immediate family, a member of the public servant's household, or an organization which a public servant has ownership interests or serves as director, officer, or employee. Can include a financial interest, this is from the current code, receipt or expectation, receipt of pecuniary benefit. This is something new, I called it economic interest. That's actually in the code, but it wasn't in this conflict section. And that's a benefit, financial interest, special privilege, or contractual relationship. And I'm going to use the example, as I go on, different examples. But for instance, and I'm going to be informal, use first names, that Meg, as the executive director of the coalition, may not have a financial interest unless there's money going to that group, but she has a contractual relationship. She's their executive director. So it's certainly a disclosable interest. So I actually like that contractual relationship. It brings in many other examples, but I'm not going to go through those, but that would be an interesting one for the ethics work, because they wrestled with how do we deal with Meg's contractual relationship, not just as a employee. But at any rate, official action, this is from the current code, which is anything but sort of clerical or ministerial action. This official action is the only place in our code where we actually define it. We really just needed to define it, so we defined it here. So I'm not changing anything. Conflict of interest, again, a new concept. What does that actually mean instead of all saying substantial material and stuff that we're using in the code right now? So, simple definition of conflict of interest is a conflict between the private interest of a public servant and the official responsibilities of the public servant in a position of trust. Now, I don't know, Suzanne, if you think that's a little bit blurry, your official responsibilities of the public servant with respect to, I'm not sure, but it's simple. It's private versus public. That's what we're talking about. Instead of all these, difficult factors to understand. The first paragraph, minor substantial conflict of interest, is what's in our current code. And this is the underlying principle. The Assembly recognizes that in a representative democracy, the representatives are drawn from society, therefore cannot and should not be without private and financial interests. But we have to figure out minor from substantial. That's an underlying concept, and it's very important. Almost all of you are over-involved in community activities. Everybody, you were elected for those reasons, so all of you are going to have conflicts. It's important to know when they matter. New definition here, substantial conflict of interest. Again, not defined in our current code. They tell you got to figure out what to do. I mean, you determine that this is substantial conflict, but when does it become one that merits non-participation? So anyway, so here's this definition. It is the body's duty to determine whether the public servant's private interest creates a substantial risk of conflict between the private interest and the official action. So again, just that simple juxtapose between private and public. And again, this is where I wanted to use undue influence, but I couldn't do it. Duty and procedure, employees. Barbara actually brought this to my attention, is that why don't we reference here that you have different disclosure responsibilities for contracts. If you're going to you or family member are going to enter into a contract situation, and that's in this AMC 115-100. So we just call that out. That has different reporting requirements. But then we get back to other potential conflicts. Then I'm going to skip down to the boards and commission members and elected officials. So one, they have the same contract disclosure stuff. And I'm not going to go over that because I simply looked that up, and again, it's quite different, the reporting requirements. But so this whole second page is, okay, how do we handle the procedure? Yeah.
So your section E2B there is a colon at the end, which implies there's a list.
Mm-hmm.
And then we pivot our or 1, 2, and 3 on the next page of the list.
Yes, it is. So we need to correct that. You're right. Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Austin Glenn Davidson has joined you on the phone.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so the entire second page is the process. The first is notes that prior to common deliberation or decision, so it's the whole action, it's not just not voting. You disclose in a public meeting, it has to be a public disclosure. This is for the benefit of the public. It's not simply that we've met with the chair ahead of time and decided, well, we don't think this would be a problem, that it must be public. And enough information in sufficient detail to permit the other members of the body to determine if the private interest is substantial. And that includes, now this is the part I was wrestling around with, and this is how it finally ended up. We took out speculative and conjectural and direct and indirect, and just tried to simplify it a little bit more. So detailed description of the interest, and I'm not sure I like the second part, but the description shall provide a response to the question of what is the interest. And we describe it in some detail.
Paula Williams.
Is someone asking a question? Okay. Also, whether the interest is financial, economic, or private, as defined in section 180. That's the definitional section of the ethics code.
You have a question, Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. Just an observation. And accidentally turned off the mic up there because there were 3. But so if you go back to the first page, section B, you have private interest as the overarching term, and then financial and economic as the sub-terms 1 and 2. But in this section, you list financial, economic, or private.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not parallel in their structure.
They're not, and I'm not quite sure how to handle that, Chris. Go ahead.
Sorry. You all know I always come back to the Bill Starr example where there was something that you were approving. It was a road construction, something, and something happened to someone's driveway. And so the item before you was to fix Bill Starr's friend's driveway. And so you went through the questions. Did he have a financial interest? No. Was it substantial? No. You know, everything, who holds the interest? Well, his friend was getting the driveway. So, but the answer was, he said, it's my friend. It's a personal interest. And so my recommendation to D, and we worked on this a little bit, we just didn't finish it. There's a difference between a private interest. So your private interest could be financial, it could be economic, but it could be personal. And so I think that's the other word, and we may have mixed up personal and private, but what it is I eat there every day. That restaurant owner is a friend of mine, you know, and I think that you need to disclose if there's something in front of the body and you disclose the personal interest. And then the question comes later, whether it's substantial. And we'll get to that later. But at least I'm just trying to suggest that that's a different type of interest.
Right, and so what I would suggest then is using that word, it's great, personal, because it communicates effectively, and then adding number 3, under B, which is personal, and then you don't conflate private interest in 2 places with 2 different meanings.
I agree with you. Okay, one rendition of personal was up there. For some brilliant reason, I took it back out. But I agree with you, personal. Let's see, whether the interest of that word, you just said financial, economic, and take out private there. And by the way, one of the things I am pointing out to the ethics code is that personal and private are used interchangeably in the conflict code, and it needs not to be that way. The other issue for the ethics board was the household members. I could never figure out why that was not in the conflict section, because it said immediate family. The charter even refers to household members. Well, it's funny, I just this morning figured it out, was because in the ethics code's definition of immediate family, they included household members. So anyway, this is going to clarify it. The immediate family to me does not mean household members, but so it was sort of fascinating, like, why was there all this confusion about household members when it's even in the charter? Let's see. Who holds the interest, whether it's the person making the disclosure, immediate family, household member, organization. When did the interest arise? This has been missing in many disclosures. You know, I had this relationship with, one of them was with Miss Allen, with Mario. I had a relationship with him. When? And we all assumed it was a legal relationship, of course, but when was it? It wasn't 5 years of litigation, was it current litigation? They've got to disclose when that happened. How does a matter coming before the body implicate the interest? What's the impact sufficient to tell on how the private interest might be impacted by the official action? Again, we're taking out all those other words, speculative, that were confusing everybody. Suzanne was confused by substantially varies. You know, what are all these terms? So again, just to look back on this, I think, you know, that this is trying to say do an adequate disclosure and a minimum reason are what are helpful. And 2, after disclosing the interest to the body, the disclosing person shall either affirm to the body that they do not believe their interest prevents them from placing the public interest above any financial or private interest. And so Chris will have to figure out that one too. Maybe it's just above any private interest.
If I might, I just think private interest is the overall category of any interest. And then you have financial, economic, or personal. Yeah, so and the difference there is your difference from your public service to private life. Mm-hmm. And so that could be your professional work, that could be your personal life and home, that could be. Right. I think that's the right word.
Okay. And 2 words.
Excuse me, Ms. Stern has a question.
Yes, thank you. I just wondered if we're going to include that kind of language. It's not included in 1.15.180. So does it make sense to maybe sort of mirror the language there? First private, it's not. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm also going to have to figure out how to add it in when we put it back in B. For Chris's suggestion, financial interest, economic, and personal interest. So I'm not sure how I will define that yet. But we'll have to come up with a definition. And I want to do it before the ethics board meeting. I do not want to give them too much time to think. They need to say yes. Okay. After disclosing the interest of the body, okay, yeah, you either say you think you can do it or not. I think that is a factor, but it does say your belief doesn't control that basically your fellow assembly people can force you into a difficult decision, whether you want to or not. And that has to do with the whole duty to vote. Next one is the presiding officer exercises parliamentary authority by making an initial ruling. And by the way, so Suzanne, you notice here, I say to you as the presiding officer of the assembly meetings, is there are no questions. They make this disclosure, the year goes right to you. Now, I'm sure if it's a longer, or you can ask if anybody has questions. It's not precluding questions, but this doesn't demand those questions. So if, and because they're not questions, they're factors. If the presiding officer exercises parliamentary authority, the initial ruling, the decision of the presiding officer may be overridden by the majority vote of the body. I think in past language it's been unclear whether you could make that initial ruling. Everybody does it, so you might as well put it in code. And here's the new thing we added. The body may also divide the question to avoid conflict on the whole. We have that dividing the question in other parts of the code, but for some reason it didn't carry over here. And you've already done that a number of times. So you're going to vote on this, but not on that. As long as you're avoiding this, you can't do anything financial. But it says in the code you can do that. It's not an up and down. You look perplexed there.
I was just thinking of that. I'm just thinking that through.
I was just
Just a mental exercise of,
doing a mental exercise of taking that into play, and what that would look like. So it's just, but I can see where you might bifurcate an issue and separate it because, like again, as a whole, it may have more intricacies than getting specific interest because it can get really complex.
Yeah. Well, here's a perfect example where this really came up. It was with the distribution of some of the federal funds. I don't know if it was ARPA, and a number of the proposals involved organizations that were somehow tied to something. Like one of them had a spouse whose organization was up for getting $200,000, and there were a number of those. And so it was, you can vote on the whole legislation, because the whole legislation is a very big piece of legislation, but you can't vote as to your piece that's tied to you or your family member. That has some problems with it, by the way, but it's the best we could do.
Well, we recently saw that with problem. We did that on the assembly. We bifurcated Meg's participation of ACH for a grant, and then ended up creating all kinds of complications. We had to go back and put it back together. I don't know if you guys recall it, but when we tried to separate it, and so, but yes, we've seen that recently.
And what you mentioned, it does create complications. But go ahead. I'm sorry, Chair.
Ms. Kern, go ahead.
Thank you. I saw that bifurcation is listed in 1.15.180, but it isn't really fleshed out. There isn't really a standard operating procedure for how to do that. And I've noticed when I've claimed a conflict, there are questions that we follow, but I don't know if those same questions go further for setting a standard for how you would bifurcate or what would, maybe that would be helpful and instructive.
Well, Robin, I think one thing we're suggesting, none of those questions need to be asked any longer if you have the adequate disclosure. Whether there should be some additional thought to bifurcation, that does become complex. And I'm not, probably not for this effort, because we want to get this through, but whether we do a separate, even the assembly could have a separate policy, internal policy that we try to develop, but that is a complicated one. So.
Mr. Johnson?
Thanks. So, if you look at Roman numeral 3 there. So we found ourselves recently in a circumstance, maybe a couple of times, I can't remember exactly when, where the body didn't want to vote to overrule the chair, they wanted to vote to affirm the ruling of the chair. And so we did it both ways to make sure we met the code requirement, which like the rules, Robert's rules, which was, and also there are similar issues there relating to separation of powers when you vote in the affirmative on something. And so I think that area is an area that might need a little bit of closer look. Maybe find that close forward, how we might manage that process.
Are you trying to put it be consistent with Robert's rules?
No, being consistent with Robert's rules would mean we would always vote negatively, or the question would be put affirmatively. I vote to override the ruling of the chair, or I move to override the ruling of the chair, and the vote would be, yes, I agree, let's override the ruling of the chair. That's standard Robert's rules. But there has been an occasion where the body didn't want to have a no vote, right? Because a majority would vote no to uphold the ruling of the chair. And that's just confusing look to the public. And instead, after we did that, maybe the vote, we redid the vote with a different language, so that it was, yes, we uphold the ruling of the chair, right? And that was, I just think we found ourselves in a position in that area where there's some conversation for us to have.
Ms. Ennis?
And can I ask, did we deem to understand what you just said?
With a little bit of input.
Ms. Jones?
I understand what he said, and I also understand where you want to go on that one. I think the one other part of this, that it says that the presiding officer exercises parliamentary authority, but really it's permissive, because the chair, and I don't think we have to, but we need to figure this out. The chair may also say, let's vote, because the chair doesn't have to exercise that authority. When it's dicey, you can see the chair is going to say, no, this is really your decision. I don't need to be involved in the middle. So I think we can work on that and flesh that one out.
Okay, great. Ms. Prince?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dee, for all your work on this, and Barbara, too. This is really great and really helpful. I just wanted to comment on the point that Mr. Constant brought up, and just when I read it under that Roman numeral 3, if the presiding officer exercises parliamentary authority, and then above where it says that the decision rests with the body, I guess I took that to mean if the chair asks the body for a ruling that, that's totally supported by the text here, and there have been instances where a member will say, I want the body to rule, and just go straight to that, which I think is fair. So anyway, yeah, I like what you've done with this, and appreciate that there were only a couple words I had to look up, but that it seemed to give that flexibility, and whether or not that needs to be made clear, I don't know.
Well, I think as long as I have the assurance of Barbara's help on this, removing it. But I think it is important, Suzanne, the way you were saying, to also remember the last sentence of the paragraph before may have to be made consistent. I understood that much of it. Okay. And if
I'll make a little joke. Dean told me the other day that Dee is a minimalist when code drafting, and he said I was a maximalist. So in that spirit, in this section, in little I, it does say that the decision rests with the body, but it's referring to whether or not the person's belief. And so in my opinion, there needs to be either part of Roman numeral I, it's going to tell you how you bring this to a vote. So, one of the things I like is the cookbook. And so the cookbook would say, the body may proceed on a motion, or the presiding officer may exercise authority. So we will make that one thing. So I'm going to use the maximalist theory there, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
And Barbara, I find that very helpful, because that sentence, I wrote it down, because that sentence does clear that up entirely, giving the chair flexibility in the body. Okay. And then the last couple, if you make that disclosure, then you can't be sanctioned when you participate. And that, I'm going to note to myself, that might be better phrased in a word of participation or something. Finally, following disclosure in a ruling by the chair or body, the jurisdiction of the Board of Ethics is limited to the sufficiency of the disclosure. In other words, they can't disagree with the decision of the body. And that provides a lot of protection. I will say a few times that the Ethics Board has watched, well, not a few times, but many times the Ethics Board has watched some of these disclosures, especially during the AO 37 days. They just would wince at the disclosures. There is a tenured philosophy professor on that group, and so he's probably a maximalist too.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Jones?
Thank you. In the number little IB or 4, I'm going to suggest that that's going to go after number 2. So the member has disclosed, they said, I don't believe I have a conflict. But before the body votes, I would like to suggest that little 4 should read, the member of the body making the disclosure shall leave the room for the body's discussion on the disclosure and shall not vote on whether the financial or private interest is substantial. I think that is part of the Board of Ethics, that it says somewhere that, or maybe I've just heard it in your training, that if a member is present in the room while the body is discussing or debating, that could assert undue influence on the members to do what the member wanted.
And I don't remember that part, right? You know, obviously once they're conflicted out, they leave the room. But I don't think in practice we've ever done that, because you need to hear what the discussion is, because the members are going to have questions. And I'm not sure how it could be an effective discussion if the person leaves. Or are you just saying just for the vote itself? Not for the discussion by the members of the conflict, because you need the member there to explain and provide additional information.
Well, I think the way the current chair, Suzanne, does it is like this. Do the members have any questions? So as soon as the disclosure is made, she offers up the opportunity for questions. And then at the end of that, then I think the member leaves, and then the body, so when she calls for the question, or is there a motion, or I'm going to rule. Now typically when she just rules, the member is there. But if there's debate, so if there's a motion, and you want the body to vote, people are supposed to leave. And the real issue here, and we can take a look at this, members should not be debating the other member who is disclosing whether or not that member has conflict. That is the issue as I understand it, because that person has made a disclosure, and now you're just voting on the disclosure, whether it's a substantial interest. Anyway, I can give you an example, but you want an example?
Mr. Carlson?
So I think that leaving the room is an interesting way to express it. It's generally our practice. But when a member has a conflict, they can actually go to the audience. And in fact, on an item they're conflicted on, they can get in the queue and speak as a member of the public. And so I don't think we should say leave the room, possibly leave the dais, possibly, and then if they're off the dais, in the room, still subject to questions, members can ask, they can come to the lectern. Or if we're at 155, some other process. But I think we should be very careful about language that suggests a member must leave the room. Because again, as it's a practice, yes, but as a force of law, I don't think it's how we practice and how we should practice.
I would tell you that the planning board, there's oftentimes just conflicts. The planning board sometimes developers, you have builders and stuff in there. They're voting on conflicts of interest, and the individual is still in the room. And then if it is a conflict, they say, okay, it is. Then they get up and they leave, or they go sit in the audience.
Mr. Fleiss?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might be getting a little bit confused. We're talking about leaving the room while the body potentially debates, whether, because we're not supposed, but I think I heard you say, Barbara Ms. Jones, that we're not supposed to be debating if a member has a conflict, or is that just in front of them? What could you?
So I think there's two things, and I will do some research with Dee on this. So the assembly member leaves the room and is outside the room when you're voting. They're not sitting in the audience. And my understanding, yeah, so like Meg makes a disclosure. The body rules that she has a substantial interest, and the chair has ruled, and she goes outside the room. She is not in the room while you're voting on that item.
Yes, she is.
Okay, I thought you were talking about just the discussion about whether or not the individual has the conflict, but it sounds like we're talking about after it's been determined that the member has a conflict.
Right. That's after your ruling, after the ruling or the vote by the body. She's not supposed to be in the room.
And that's how we've done it. In fact, I actually had another question that went to number 1, because it said prior to comment, deliberation, or decision on any matter coming before the board, commission, or body, the member discloses. And that's been a question too, like, oh, can I sit for the public hearing? Can I be present for the public hearing and wait for the disclosure? I think there has been an instance, maybe, of that in the time since we've been on the body. I know there's been questions about it. So I thought we were talking about the debate about the conflict initially, but then agree that the practice has been the person leaves the room, although I'm not clear on entirely when they're supposed to, if they, before there's any public testimony, if that's what comment means, public comment, I assume.
Dee?
And this is from the old code. This is what's been current code, excuse me. So that's an excellent point. I think normally members are recording things for disclosure at the beginning before the public hearing. So it is, as a practical matter, getting ruled on at that point prior to the public hearing.
And she's got the live document and doing the up.
Wouldn't it make sense that they can come sit and listen to the public hearing?
Ms. Jones?
So through the chair, I think you need to make a decision on that, because I am going to tell you what happened one time. One of the members was sitting in the audience and had been ruled to have a substantial interest in the matter before the body. And another member said, I think you should call on so-and-so, she's making faces out in the audience. And so that is the type of issue that you want to avoid, because I think the concern is that if that person is in the audience making faces, which I don't know if that's true or not, that person is actually influencing the body how to vote. So I think that that's something that the body needs to decide, and maybe that's another factor, that whether the practice is that the person leaves the room while the body, and that's, I believe, why the person leaves the room. But if the person can stay in the room, I think that there may be reasons to allow someone to stay in the room. But I think you probably want to flesh that out. What are those circumstances that they have a right to be in the room? But what are the circumstances where they cannot be in the room because it would assert undue influence over the body?
Mr. Cross?
It would be nice if you just had a separate area with a monitor that shows what's going on. That way they can watch, but not influence through body language. That way they can still, and then if you have a question for them, they can still be brought forward if there's something that's, but I mean, they have a right to kind of watch, but I do agree that they don't have the right to use their body language to put undue influence. So,
Chris?
Yeah, I have a completely different opinion. I believe that a member, if they're conflicted out, can in fact stand in front of the lectern, speak as a member of the public on the public hearing and come before you. I think that there's no reason why a member sacrifices their First Amendment right to communicate and in fact their right to petition their government if in fact they have a conflict on the item. So I think we do have to really closely look at this. And there have been times in the 6 years I've been in the body where a member has stepped off the dais and into the audience and participated out there and reasonably. I think the practice of leaving the room, it's because it's convenient, the board's right there, we leave the lectern, we walk out, we leave the dais, and then we come back when it's over. But this idea of somebody making faces being determinative of a decision made by the body is, to me, it's a little bit of a red herring. Like, somebody might have sour grapes up on the dais, why is he making funny faces, but that doesn't have anything to do with the matter of the question or what the body has decided. And the body is quite qualified to make difficult decisions with lots of information. So, yes, we should have this conversation, but I'm not going to blatantly concede that a member gives up their authority and right as a resident citizen to participate in the public process because they can't sit on the dais and vote.
Well, so then my question is, if they wanted to participate, why did they bring up the conflict? I mean, if they wanted to participate, then they shouldn't have brought up, but legally they had a conflict, but they wanted to participate anyway. That's the reason we have a conflict of interest rules. It's because if they have a conflict, they shouldn't be participating. Am I misreading this?
And I would offer that it's two different kinds of participation. The public has a right generally to participate in the government. The public hearing is sitting in that room. The public doesn't generally have a right to sit on the dais and be part of a conversation about a specific issue that's before the body. And so when you're conflicted out because you have a personal interest on an item, a private interest on an item, then you can't participate in the dialogue and the debate. You can't participate up there by pressing the red or green button. But as a member of the public generally, you would have a right that you don't sacrifice when you swear an oath.
So you're saying they could come up and testify and they would still have an influence as to the outcome of the vote on that?
Yes, but no more influence than a member of the public at large.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Ms. Ennis?
Well, I was going to say, an easy example was when a former assembly person lived on West High that when they were renaming that street. And she signed a petition for one name or something. And then she came to me and said, now you are a member of the public because you are taking a public role. But no, she could still get up and testify that she liked the name of that street. So I sort of agree with Chris that you forfeit your right to act as an assembly member and voting and all that, but not as the right of the public. You could participate, for instance, in the debate, your assembly debate and the vote, but you could participate as a public member.
Actually, thank you, Donna. I think Chris makes a really good point because even when you're no longer a assembly member of the public, because of your experience and because of your reputation, you might say an individual is undue influence just because of their experience and knowledge. So they're just temporarily stepping out of that seat, becoming a member of public. So you make a really good point, Chris.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Continue.
And that is actually the end of this.
I have a little more, Mr. Chair. Under your section about the mayor, we had an incident recently where we had to really think through the process of mayor and conflicts. And so the charter grants the mayor the authority to participate in meetings as a member. So this is not in his capacity as a member, it's in his capacity as the mayor, which isn't, they don't have a role other than veto in somebody. They can make motions when they do that. they're acting as a member. And so what I would say is we should contemplate adding a sentence either as 7 under the Roman numerals or in 3 that states if the mayor is participating as a member of the body under his charter right, then he's subject to the ethics code of a member.
And I'll get more words from you in a minute, but I think that's interesting. This paragraph was not meant to really apply to the mayor at the assembly.
Right.
It was for all other things, like Mayor Sullivan had an interest in the restaurant, and when they expanded the DID, the ethics board said you have to delegate everything to the municipal manager because you have a major interest in whether the assessment doubles. So it actually, interestingly enough, Chris, was never meant to deal with the mayor at the assembly meeting.
Right, and we came upon that basically, it was in relationship to participating in an executive session that was based on his own business. And so it wasn't proper for that individual to participate as a member because clearly there was a conflict. And so we should speak to that here since we have
It's
this.
interesting. And, you know,
Continue.
and so Chris, you had said if the mayor is participating as a member, well,
The mayor is subject to, go ahead, Mr. Parker.
Ms. Jones?
Okay, so I think that making it like little 7 is fine. And what I wrote from what Christopher said is, if the mayor is participating in an assembly meeting, or you could say as an assembly member, but I think you want to say in an assembly meeting because that's the participation of the mayor. The above rules shall apply to the mayor because the mayor is number 2, an elected official. And then it discusses those potential conflicts, and then you go back up and start at Little Roman 1. Prior to comment deliberation, a disclosure needs to be made. After disclosing to the body, then we just go through the little rubric. So I think that's what you're looking for. Is that correct?
Accurate. And then that actually raises, if I might, just one more concern, and not relating to the mayor, but that circumstance brought it to attention. What happens when the body recognizes a conflict in a member, but the member is not there to tell us they do or do not have a conflict? We ruled as a body that the mayor had a conflict, even though the mayor was not present. Because it's attached, the conflict attached to a record that as a member, that individual may have a right to hear in the future if the determination wasn't made. And so there's a subtlety there that is, it might be pretty far out for us to be contemplating that, but what happens when the body wants to find a conflict because there's enough information in the public sphere?
My non-Robert's rule or parliamentary guess would be that you have the right as the assembly to make that determination. You have to prior to moving into the matter. It shouldn't be just when you, at some point you, well, anyway, I don't see that as a problem. I don't think that an assembly member, if they're not there, or the mayor, if they're not there, has a, God-given right that they get to present their side of the story, either they're there or they're not.
The way this is written, though, prior to comment, the member shall disclose. Right? And so if that's the trigger, part 1 there, all those other items, and there's no disclosure made, right? I don't know.
Okay, we'll think about that. And Frank raised another point, by the way.
Continue.
The mayor says it's also problematic because in the old days, the potential conflict, it says, has to be presented to the ethics board. That's just not practical at all. I mean, occasionally, like something big like we did, but other types of conflicts. But this used to say to the mayor or to the ethics officer. And now that the ethics officer is not really part of the system right now, because the ethics officer actually came from the previous to 2015 or 17 code. So there's really, at this point, no municipal ethics officer. So this whole, how in the world does the mayor make disclosures to the ethics board when they meet once a month? So I'm not even, I was going to bring this up to the ethics board. And then initially it was always to the ethics board, and then I inserted that as a you have to put the ethics officer into here because I'm there every day and he can ask me questions. But now that position is in limbo, so it's sort of impractical right now. Setting up a directive that may or may not be logistically possible.
Mr. Jordan, Mr. Chair, do you need a motion to extend?
Yes, I think we do. Are you making one?
Move to extend 10 minutes?
Second.
Seeing no opposition, we are extended for 10 minutes. Ms. Jones?
Okay, so Dee's talking and I'm writing. So here's what I wrote for, it would be VIII, so little 8. If a member is absent, the body has a right to apply the above rules to the absent member or something to that effect. So in other words, it says that prior to comment deliberation, the detailed description of the interest, so then the body has the right to apply these rules to the absent member.
Mr. Johnson?
I wonder if there's a way, instead of us getting so specific, because this is an extraordinarily rare circumstance, but very real, instead we create a general principle that states the assembly has the authority or discretion to act. And I'm not sure how that language would read, but depending on the unanticipated nuances of difficult questions, I don't know how you would encode that, but provide the assembly its ability, which is there. I mean, it's clearly stated in a number of places that the decision rests with the body, right? And so it's probably a riff on that speaks to a general applicable principle, as opposed to, because we could come up with probably a lot of scenarios that are very unusual. And I'm sorry, I kind of belabored that one, but it's fresh.
Yeah. For instance, let's say it's not the mayor, well, say it is the mayor. And then at the next meeting, does the mayor or whoever it is ever, can they move, they can't move to reconsideration, right? They reconsider outside the deadline there. And so I'm wondering, how could they ever come back and have that debate from that up from the new point forward?
The specific example I want is the tapes of the executive session and the right to listen to them. It wouldn't matter what changed going forward. It would be if the individual had the right today, has the right tomorrow and forever to come and listen, which would be a violation of the trust of that conversation. So we have had maybe on a better example.
Mr. Prince?
No, I was just thinking of when we revisited an issue of a member who had been ruled to have a conflict or had thought they had had a conflict. And I guess I would assume that if there was new information, that at any point you brought up again if there was something that had, probably not in this particular case with the mayor, but am I not understanding correctly?
Well, besides that, I think in that particular case, there was a new official action, and with each official action, there's either a disclosure or a reference that this has been previously disclosed, which actually is another interesting concept that's not dealt with here. Because these disclosures should be public, should they be relayed at every single meeting? Because you have new public members watching them, and I think all of you would like to avoid that, especially on the longer disclosures. And so that's actually not addressed here as well. But that, in your case, Susanna, the example you just mentioned, it was a new official action, so they would have the opportunity to disclose anyway. So it's different.
So we're talking about if an individual, was absent, and like in the case that was before the body, it was determined there was a conflict, and so then that individual could not listen to the executive session tapes. I mean, couldn't that be brought back before the body when the body convened? I mean, I don't know where it would fit, or it would have to be, I doubt it.
I think that's parliamentary rules, it's not ethics rules, so I don't know how that works for you. Way to go, Chris.
Ms. Jones?
So I think what we're looking for is a savings clause. So there's some rule that covers all of these issues so that it's the body has the authority to make rulings it determines to effectuate this chapter.
What kind of clause did you call that?
I called it a savings clause.
Savings clause.
So
Okay.
if, you know, like, I think Christopher brought up 2 examples and I proposed 2 things, and then he said, yeah, but there's more, and Suzanne brought up another one. So they're right, you can't just legislate all of this. So you need what is a savings clause that all of those fit under. And they all do. They're examples of where the body knows that someone has a potential conflict and a disclosure needs to be made to the public, or an undisclosure needs to be made to the public, and you're doing that. So it just allows you not to codify everything.
Savings clause.
Legal term of art.
Yes.
Right.
So I saw you taking notes, Dee. Did you get
Oh, yeah,
get that down?
that's all I have to say.
All right, fantastic.
Another question.
Go ahead.
But what do you think about this whole issue of redisclosure? I mean, someone has really adequately disclosed something 2 or 3 times, but yet there's a new public meeting, and I don't know if there's any way to expedite that. But someone had talked about a log at one point. I think that's a lot of additional work. And can't expect the public to look at the log. So if you have any ideas, an idea to address it here.
Well, typically, or possibly the chair could say, well, you know, I ruled at such and such a meeting that you have a conflict on this. And then the member would say, yes, I do, and then they would get up and leave. And so it functioned like, it seemed to be functioning well when that happened, you know.
Well, so that works if you have a rule it's a conflict. But if you haven't ruled it's a conflict, you said the last time it was not a conflict, how is that going brought out again for the public at the next meeting? So your side works, but it's the other, because you already ruled it's a conflict, maybe you don't have to go through the whole debate again, it's just complete.
But so if she ruled that there wasn't a conflict, and you think they would have to go through it again to rule that there was not a conflict after we already ruled before? Am I misreading you?
No, that is what I'm saying, that I'm trying to figure out how can we accomplish both goals. And one goal is the public needs to know about conflicts, or maybe it's simply a reference to where the conflict was disclosed. And that's what Chris has done.
And if I could just
Or the individual member could bring it up themselves. Yeah, I have a conflict on this. You ruled I have a conflict on this, and so I'm going to be leaving the room. And
It's not a conflict.
well, and there was
yeah, if you ruled that there wasn't a conflict, that actually could probably, especially if the person thought they had a conflict, that's when the rub begins.
Mr. Chair, I would just say that there was the instance with the snow removal, and I was getting, questions from members of the public, even though the individual had already been established not to have a conflict. I think it's important, whenever some kind of abbreviated or summary of, what has happened before can be mentioned. I mean, that's what I like to do as a member, but it depends.
Mr. Cousin?
And just my own experience with the recent debate on Holton Hills, I could say I've declared a conflict at the beginning of every time I touched the microphone and had the cue to speak, and it wouldn't suffice for those who wanted to find a conflict because they wanted me to not be able to participate. And so I made the declaration like 4 different times, and then at that point the declaration was made on this time of this date. I'm not going to do this again, but you can go watch the record. The record exists. And that's just because when you get into those contentious conversations, those who don't agree are going to continue to hammer on that you're wrong. And so it was a very sensitive issue for me.
Well, I like the idea I like the idea that at least some type of reference that this has been discussed in the past, so that the members of the public realize, yeah, we hear your concern and we have dealt with it. And how far that goes to an abbreviated summary, I don't know. Or whether simply this has been ruled on, we have looked at it. That might be enough just for the public to know that their concern has been addressed.
Mr. Cousin?
And so if this is in the rules and somebody forgets on the 7th time, are they subject to recall?
Move to extend 10 minutes.
Second.
All right, so we're stepping another 10 minutes. Ms. Jones? Ms. Jones?
Mr. Chair, I totally agree. You know, I sit in about half of your meetings and I review the minutes and I don't remember all of your disclosures. I think and your duty is to disclose. And of course you can't participate if you have a conflict, but the duty to disclose is like this big and the actual conflicts are only this big. And so when items continually come before you, you know, it's really a burden, and I think people could forget that they had made a disclosure and needed to make it again. So my recommendation is not to make this a rule, but instead I think it could be something that's in the guidance, the training that we're providing. You know, I think the body needs to ultimately decide, but I'm just letting you know that there's some danger to that to the member. Jamie suggested that maybe, you know, we could put it in the minutes, but you know what it's like getting those agendas ready, and then, you know, we're not always up on the minutes, but then we could just put, there was a disclosure, the rest of the clerk's office would kill me for saying that. But is that what happens? Anyway, I'm just offering you a couple of options.
Mr. Cousin?
This might be too much, but I think about the agenda. You mentioned the agenda. If there is an item that continues and a member has made a disclosure, it could be a note in the agenda itself, not in the minutes, so we don't have to find out if it was there and someone has to capture it in the process after the fact, but going in. And it could also be for those who have been found to have a conflict, that it could be there as well. And in that way, there's some clarity. I don't know that I agree with that. I'm just putting that out there as an idea to chew on. I have to think about the potential secondary and tertiary impacts and ramifications, but that's another path, which is not the minutes with the agenda.
Dee?
I'll say the ethics board will definitely want redisclosure, because it's a public right to know type of thing. So I wonder, just a simple reference, what Suzanne is saying, like reference that this conflict has been disclosed before and discussed and hereby by the body, period.
If you forget, it's something to be done 5 times, on the 6th time you forget. Chris, we can't hear you.
And I think Chris said, what if the person forgets? I don't see how you could actually forget if you had a conflict and you disclosed it, but Mr.
Mr. Chair, it's not a conflict, it's a disclosure. So,
Disclosure, okay.
I think what's important is our duty isn't to ourselves as much as it's to the public. And so as inconvenient as it is, I think those need to be reinstated because not all the public attend every meeting. And so for those individuals that may be attending for the first time, I think it's important to restate those. I would rather err on the side of caution than on the side of convenience for us. Because this doesn't happen often enough for us to, I mean, you know, whenever it happens, yes, it takes time, but that's part of the duty that we have to the public, to make sure they're informed of what decisions we're making.
Mr. Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree with Kevin on that and appreciate the former assembly member who did disclosure every time about, you know, her spouse who was working for the fire department. We heard that a lot, and I think that was good. I will say that, you know, I did have a moment of panic one time when I worked for a telecommunications company, and something on the consent agenda kind of buried in was a lease to a subsidiary company, and I hadn't caught that on my first read. At the end of the day, it wasn't any interest, financial, economic, or personal, but I mean, I think there is still a chance someone could miss something, and you raised the point about, I think in here, what you had said, sanction for acting, and recall is, I assume, one of those.
It's not intended. The recall is independent action. But it doesn't matter, same concept, like Chris is saying, I wonder if we can come up with a version of best efforts to redisclose, following the initial disclosure, maybe something like that, following the initial disclosure and subsequent meetings on that official action or something. Make best efforts to disclose. So, no.
Mr. Carlson.
Yeah, thanks. I think that this is, it's so interesting. The body has decided there is no conflict. There's no conflict. What we're talking about is what the body's manipulating. The conflict is either non-existent or inconsequential, and that did not affect the official action, that the member can't participate. And so the redisclosure is, again, it's like you're redisclosing nothing exists or doesn't exist. It has been ruled that this is not significant. And so the argument that you should have to continue making that disclosure is irrational in some ways.
Ms. Simmons.
But you can split that up. I mean, if there's a new official action, it's one thing I called Mills, which was the same official action on hearing after hearing after hearing.
Oh, yeah. New action is a
new
totally
official
different
action,
thing.
you have to disclose.
Yeah, a new action is always a totally different question. Right, I thought we were talking, maybe I got a little less attention than I should when we moved on, but I thought we were talking about the fifth meeting or the third meeting. You've already made the disclosure, the body's already ruled that it's not a substantial personal private conflict.
I thought we were talking about when you have a conflict in like in the minutes, but maybe we're talking about both.
the clerk's office doesn't make a distinction. What we put in the minutes is that member so-and-so made a disclosure. So, because that's what the duty is. It's not, it may say that the chair ruled that the person did or did not have substantial financial or other interest, or it will report the vote because the vote is important. But we don't put what the disclosure was. We don't put any of that. So we're back to it's just. It just says that a disclosure was made.
Ms. Simmons?
Maybe there could be a simple statement, a simple statement that members must redisclose when there are new official actions. So that the redisclosure is only attached to new actions. So when it is 5 hearings in a row, you did it at the first one. But if it is, like, Meg has to disclose all the time because there's official actions all the time that are happening, even though she's made that one disclosure 10 times. So maybe that's the way to do it. It's just the title, duty to read it, disclose to new official actions.
Mr. Carlson?
And I think it's important to tie it to the record of the action, right? Because Barbara's talking about the minutes. The minutes record this item, which is the full action from introduction to either passage or other. That in that record there is a disclosure, and it's done in a timely, full manner. And I don't object to personally making the decision to say that all concerns, hey, I've disclosed, I have this, do you want the full details? Look out of the record. But I don't want to be subject to recall because I forgot after the 5th time. So, that's my line.
And by including something about a duty to read, disclose, or new actions, you only clarify a lot about that. Yes, there is a duty to read, disclose. So there you go. There is a duty to read, disclose, but it has to be an official action. Well, Chris, you don't like the word official action, right?
No, I do. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
It's the official action is the right framework around, although I think about and how we define actions, like every little part of the process, I think that is an S1 version, a new action, right, S2. So I have some concern around that, but to me it's the record of the process from the beginning to the end, dispatching of whatever that item might be. And every time you have an item that has a potential of a conflict, you must within it disclose the potential of a conflict, providing this determination. So yes, every time there's a new item, but I don't think it's necessary whether it's an S1 or an S2 or an S3 or, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we need to extend another 10 minutes.
So moved.
We're extended for 10 minutes. Ms. Jones?
I think I would caution the body from using the term re-disclosure because really, if there is new official action, it's just a disclosure. And, it's what Ms. LaFrance said about a former member who disclosed every time about her spouse's employment with the fire department. It was religious, and that is not a re-disclosure, it's a new disclosure because it was a new meeting, there was probably a new item on the agenda. And I think we can agree that Meg does the same thing. It's not a re-disclosure of her employment, it's a new disclosure every time. So anyway, I just discourage you from using that term because I'm re-disclosure, because I think that suggests that members have that obligation that they may not have if they previously disclosed on an item.
Mr. Carlson?
And I think that's really important because every item and its factors are different, and the scope and the potential of a conflict. If I work at a substance abuse treatment provider, does that money come to my company? There's a conflict. Does the money go to the provider in the field? Probably not a conflict. Should disclose that. And so every issue, it depends on the nature of the conflict, whether or not the body will determine it is a conflict, so you have to make it disclosure every time.
Can I just have Barbara one question? Is the word item, isn't it defined in Title II? I might just check that, but yeah.
Which word is you talking about?
The word item in
Item.
Title II, the assembly procedures, I think they defined item at some point.
Okay.
I appreciate your discussion.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Chair. And I think that I do need to check with the clerk's office and see if we could put disclosure on the agendas. I really wonder if that partially would address this. it would really help the chair, because then chair would see it and say, oh yeah, so-and-so made a disclosure on this, or maybe the chair was on vacation last week and then says, oh, so-and-so made a disclosure on this. So anyway, let me check into that, because I think that really procedurally solves this problem without putting, this, it just feels too messy otherwise. So anyway, let me see if we can do something about that. I still think you have to decide, but I will look in to see if we can procedurally do it.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. I still see we have another item on our agenda that we have yet to get to yet. And so I'm wondering if we can get an elections update here. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left since we extended for the third time. Ms. Hines?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your elections update. The database for the adjudication system is completed. That includes all new precinct and district information after redistricting. This was a huge lift for Liz, but she started early in December and verified and re-verified and re-verified throughout the process. So we're excited that that is finalized. Our ballot pieces have been approved, and we expect our official ballot tomorrow. After that, we will be sending it to our print and mail vendor. And that's the last piece that they're waiting on. WOCAVA ballots will be going out on February 27th, and everyone else's ballots goes out on March 13th. Our staffing is looking good this year. We needed to hire 17 new workers, and between referrals from our election workers who had worked state elections and referred folks from that election to us, and also our own recruitment process, we are down to meeting 3 more people, and I think we still have 2 upcoming interviews next week. So we're looking good there. And at this point, we are turning to training. Next week, later this month, we'll start out with signature verification training, and then we also conduct active shooter training for everyone every other year, and so this is the year that we'll be conducting that training. So we are looking good.
Fantastic. And we are still tracking people's ballots. Is still available for voters this year, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And if they signed up last year, they don't have to sign up again. It continues, is that correct?
That's correct. Once you've signed up whether you signed up during the April election for community or community's June election or the state's June election, once you sign up, you stay signed up.
Once they've got your phone number, they send you texts.
Yes.
Because I know I got several from them myself last year, so. Well, fantastic. Thanks for the update on the upcoming election. Mr. Constant.
Yes, thanks. How many pages for the ballot?
The ballot is 2 cards. It's the front and back of one card and the front of a second card.
And is the front of the second card just the one special election question, or is it more?
The special election question is going on the front of the first card, and what is on the front of the second card is, I believe it's the marijuana and child care charter amendment. It was very large, and it worked well to put it crosses the whole page. And so you're going to see at the bottom what looks like a little tick mark to the right of the yes and no, and it's because the ballots are column, but the font covers the whole column except for down there, so it's nice and big, and
Okay,
it's
that's
the whole
it.
thing on one side.
I wanted to know what it looks like. Thanks. 3 pages, 2 cards.
All right, great. Fantastic. Well, we don't have any old business. Is anyone interested in audience participation? Anyone calling in that would like to participate? I believe to unmute yourself at *6. You have 3 minutes. Well, let's turn the mic on just in case someone's speaking to us. Anyone wish to participate in the audience out there? Not hearing anyone wanting to participate, I guess it's time for adjournment. I'll take a motion.
So moved.
We are adjourned.